"You think this little trinket means something, old man?" The young airline clerk, no older than 22, sneered, his fingers flicking the edge of the purple heart medal that lay nestled in a small, custom-carved recess on the worn dark cherry wood handle of an old cane. "It's just a piece of metal, a souvenir from some forgotten skirmish. Now, are you going to pay the exorbitant baggage fee for that monstrosity you call a carry-on? Or are you going to hold up the line all day reminiscing about your war stories?" The old man, Arthur Jenkins, winced a sharp, almost imperceptible tremor passing through his frail body. It wasn't the unexpected fee that stung, nor the clerk's dismissive wave towards his meticulously packed duffel bag. It was the casual, brutal cruelty in the young man's voice, the utter contempt for something so sacred, his hand gnarled by age, scarred by shrapnel, and stiffened by arthritis tightened on the cane. This wasn't just metal. It was a testament to sacrifice, a shard of his very soul, a constant, tangible reminder of brothers lost and a life almost extinguished. This was a piece of history, paid for in blood. If you believe true heroes who have sacrificed so much deserve our utmost and unwavering respect, comment respect below. Arthur Jenkins was 84 years old. In fact, his aching joints and stooped shoulders reminded him of every morning. His clothes, always clean, but often a little too loose on his thinning frame, carried the faint nostalgic scent of mothballs and old cherished memories. He navigated the world with a quiet patience, a man who had seen too much to be easily rattled by its modern cacophony, yet was often bewildered by its pace. He lived a life of unassuming solitude in a small, tidy bungalow on the outskirts of Oakhaven, a town that had largely forgotten or, perhaps, never known the fire and fury of his youth. His days were measured by the rhythmic ticking of a grandfather clock in the hall and the soft rustle of newspapers he read cover to cover. Few, if any, in his sleepy suburban enclave knew the man he once was, Sergeant Arthur Jenkins, U.S. Marine Corps. They didn't know the searing heat of distant jungles, the terrifying symphony of battle, or the profound weight of responsibility he had carried on shoulders that were then young and strong. He was flying today a rare excursion from his quiet routine. His granddaughter Sarah, his only grandchild, was graduating from college with honors, and he wouldn't miss it for the world. It was a trip he'd saved for meticulously over many months. Setting aside a little from his meager pension each week, the airport, when he finally arrived after a nerve-wracking taxi ride, was a bewildering, overwhelming labyrinth of hurried, anonymous bodies, bright blinking digital screens displaying an endless scroll of destinations and delays, and a constant barrage of announcements that seemed to blur into one unintelligible drone. It was a universe away from the silent, watchful green jungles that still after all these decades formed the vivid, often unsettling backdrop of his dreams. He clutched his candy purple heart, embedded in its handle a quiet comfort, a secret strength, an anchor in the swirling chaos. He'd carved the space for it himself, painstakingly, with an old whittling knife, a small, private act of remembrance. When the original ribbon had frayed beyond repair, he wasn't looking for accolades, for gratitude, or for special treatment. All Arthur Jenkins ever sought was a little quiet dignity, the simple courtesy one human being might extend to another. The world, however, often had other ideas. The check-in clerk, whose laminated name tag clipped askew on his ill-fit uniform shirt, Reed Bradley, continued his tirade of dismissive pronouncements, seemingly oblivious to the discomfort he was causing, or perhaps reveling in it. "Look, sir," Bradley said, his voice dripping with condescension, his eyes performing an exaggerated role that was clearly meant for the increasingly impatient passengers forming a line behind Arthur. "I don't have all day. We're on a schedule. Here, you know, the flight to Denver is scheduled for boarding in less than 40 minutes. Your bag," he gestured dramatically towards Arthur's modest canvas duffel, "is oversized for a carry-on. It's an extra $75. It's standard policy. Posted, you can't miss it." Arthur fumbled in his worn leather wallet, his fingers clumsy and slow. The unexpected expense was a blow he had budgeted so carefully. I was sure my carry-on was regulation size," he murmured, his voice soft, almost apologetic, easily. Lost in the terminal's din, he had measured it twice before leaving home. "Well, you thought wrong, didn't you?" Bradley snapped, a smug smirk playing on his lips. He tapped impatiently on his keyboard. then looked pointedly at the growing queue. Another passenger, woman in a sharp business suit with a Bluetooth earpiece, sighed audibly and checked her expensive watch. Bradley's smirk widened, fueled by the silent support of the inconvenienced. "Maybe if you spent less time polishing your souvenirs," he said, flicking his eyes meaningfully towards the Purple Heart on Arthur's cane. "And more time reading the actual baggage guidelines on our website, we wouldn't be having this conversation, would we, Grandpa?" A dull flush crept up Arthur's neck, warming his ears. The word Grandpa, delivered with such casual derision, felt like a slap. He wanted to explain to tell this arrogant young man that the cane was more than just a walking aid, that the medal wasn't a souvenir but a symbol of agonizing pain and sacrifice, of comradeship forged in the crucible of war. He wanted to tell him about the searing shrapnel, the mud, the blood, the fear that tasted like copper in your mouth. But the words caught in his throat, thick and useless. He had learned long ago in far more perilous situations that some battles weren't worth fighting with words, especially against an enemy fortified by ignorance and armed with petty authority. Some people simply wouldn't tort codins, T-understand. He had made his peace with that dot. Or so he thought. With trembling hands, Arthur slowly, deliberately counted out the $75 in crumpled bills. The humiliation was a cold, hard knot in his stomach. It wasn't about the money, it was about the utter lack of respect. The casual stripping away of his dignity in front of strangers. He could feel their eyes on him, the collective weight of their impatience, and he imagined their disdain. The woman in the business suit was now tapping her foot rhythmically, an aggressive metronome marking his shame. A young man with oversized headphones, oblivious to the nuances but annoyed by the delay, shook his head and let out an exasperated groan. Bradley snatched the money from Arthur's outstretched hand with a theatrical flourish, as if he were handling something distasteful. There, see, was that so terribly hard? He then slapped a bright, lurid orange oversized tag onto Arthur's duffel bag with unnecessary force. Gate B-17. Departure in 45 minutes. "Try not to miss your flight, old-timer." He punctuated the remark with a dismissive chuckle and immediately turned his attention to the next customer, his voice instantly transforming into a model of false cheerfulness. "Next, please. Good morning. How can I help you today?" Arthur retrieved his the smooth, cool metal of the Purple Heart, a familiar pressure point against his palm. He felt a profound weariness settle over him, burden heavier than any oversized bag. He picked up his tagged duffel and began the slow, shuffling walk towards the security checkpoint, the clerk's sneering laughter echoing faintly in his ears. Perhaps he conceded. Only in the corridors of his own sensitive mind he endured the subsequent indignity of the security screening, with his customary stoicism, removing his worn shoes. His belt, the contents of his pockets, placed in a gray plastic tray. He shuffled through the metal detector, was subjected to a cursory pat-down by an impassive agent, and then waited patiently for his belongings to emerge on the conveyor belt. Each step, each impersonal procedure, felt heavier than the last. Chipping away at his already fragile composure, he was just an old man, an inconvenience, a relic from a forgotten time. After what felt like an eternity navigating the crowded concourses, old leg throbbing with a familiar ache, Arthur finally approached Gate B-17. He was a little flustered, out of breath, and anxious about the time, and there, to his dismay, stood Bradley. Again, the young clerk was no longer manning the check-in desk, but was now chatting animatedly, almost flirtatiously, with the gate agent, a woman named Sharon who wore a crisply ironed uniform and an air of detached efficiency. As Arthur came forward to present his boarding pass, Bradley, who seemed to possess an uncanny ability to be wherever Arthur felt most vulnerable, caught sight of him, and more specifically, the cane. "Oh, look who it is!" Sharon Bradley exclaimed, his voice deliberately loud, clearly intended for the consumption of the other passengers milling around the gate area. Several heads turned. "It's our decorated war hero again. Still got that lucky charm, I see." He gestured towards the Purple Heart on Arthur's cane, with a mocking tilt of his head and a condescending wink aimed at Sharon. Sharon, the gate agent, looked momentarily uncomfortable, a flicker of professional unease. Crossing her face-butt, she quickly smoothed her expression and said nothing. Busying herself with her computer screen, Arthur just wanted to board the plane. To find his seat, to disappear into the comforting anonymity of the cabin, he offered his boarding pass without a word, his gaze fixed on some indeterminate point beyond Sharon's shoulder. Then a clear, innocent voice piped up. A young boy, no older than 10, perched on a nearby seat, pointed a curious finger. "Mommy Luke, what's that shiny purple thing on that old man's stick?" His mother, engrossed in her phone, shushed him absently. Before the mother could properly respond or Arthur could even attempt a quiet, dignified retreat, Bradley interjected, his voice oozing with false authority and amusement. "That kid," he said, leaning towards the boy conspiratorially, "is what some old guys use to try and get free upgrades or special favors. You play the sympathy card. Doesn't really work anymore, though." He winked at the boy, who now looked thoroughly confused. Glancing between Bradley's smug face and Arthur's weary, stoic one, the implication was clear. Arthur was a fraud, a manipulator, using a mere bauble to game the system. The injustice of it, the sheer, unadulterated disrespect finally pierced through Arthur's practiced composure. The carefully constructed walls of his silence began to crumble. He opened his mouth, it, lifetime of suppressed indignation welling up, ready to finally defend not just the metal, but the sacred memory it represented. He was about to speak, to unleash the torrent of words he had held back for so long, to tell this ignorant boy and everyone else within earshot exactly what that shiny purple thing signified. But before he could utter a single syllable, a different voice cut through, the air as crisp and authoritative as a rifle shot. "Excuse me? What did you just say, son?" Every head in the immediate vicinity swiveled. Standing a few feet away, having just arrived at the gate, with a quiet, commanding presence, was a man in a flawlessly pressed U.S. Air Force uniform. He was tall, lean, and immaculate, with neatly trimmed silver hair at his temples and the unmistakable, confident aura of senior command. His uniform jacket sleeves bore the gleaming silver eagles of a full colonel. His eyes, a startlingly piercing shade of blue, were fixed unwaveringly on Bradley. Bradley, mid-smirk, faltered, the color drained from his face with alarming speed, leaving behind a pasty, sickly pallor. His earlier arrogance evaporated like mist in a harsh wind. "A nothing, sir," he stammered, his voice suddenly several octaves higher. "Just up making conversation, assisting this passenger." He gestured vaguely towards Arthur, avoiding the colonel's direct gaze. The colonel's gaze didn't waver for a second. It was a look that could freeze fire. He took one deliberate step closer, his polished black shoes clicking sharply on the terminal floor. His eyes then shifted from the now trembling Bradley to Arthur, made Arthur's breath catch to the cane in his hand. To the small, embedded metal, the colonel's expression, previously stern and questioning, changed in an instant. A flicker of recognition, then astonishment, then profound, unadulterated respect dawned on his face. The colonel's intense blue eyes locked onto the Purple Heart. He then looked at Arthur's face, really looked at him not as an old man, but as a man. A flicker of something profound, a distant memory, a dawning understanding, a jolt of shock passed across his distinguished features. "That cane," the colonel began, his voice softer now, but still carrying an immense, undeniable weight that silenced the ambient chatter of the gate area. He ignored Bradley completely, as if the clerk had ceased to exist. He stepped towards Arthur, his movements precise and respectful. "Sir," he said, addressing Arthur with a deference that was startling in its sincerity, "may I—" He gestured almost reverently towards the cane. Arthur, utterly surprised by this sudden, dramatic turn of events, could only nod mutely. He was accustomed to being overlooked, not scrutinized with such intensity by a high-ranking officer. Colonel gently, carefully took the cane from Arthur's unresisting hand. He examined the embedded Purple Heart for a long moment, his touch surprisingly delicate, his brow furrowed in concentration. He then looked back at Arthur, his eyes searching the old man's weathered face. "Jenkins," he said, the name a quiet question, a probe into the depths of time. "Arthur Jenkins. Sergeant Arthur Jenkins. 3rd Battalion, the 5th Marines, Keesan Hill, 881 South." Arthur's eyes, clouded by age and weariness, suddenly widened. The name, the place, the unit, they were like keys unlocking a hidden chamber in his mind. A memory sharp and shockingly vivid cut through the fog of decades. A young, barely 20-something, Marine Lieutenant impossibly brave. Face smeared with grime, and resolve leading a desperate, near-suicidal charge under a relentless torrent of enemy fire. A boy, really, thrust into the hell of command. "Lieutenant Miller," Arthur whispered, the name tasting foreign, yet achingly familiar on his tongue. "Is that you, son?" "Lieutenant Daniel Miller." The colonel's stern professional demeanor finally cracked. A rare, wide smile, deep, palpable emotion, touched his lips, transforming his face. "It's Colonel Daniel Miller now, sir," he said, his voice thick with unshed tears. "But, yes, I was that scared, green young lieutenant you pulled out of that godforsaken firefight on Hill 881 South back in '68. You saved my life that day, Sergeant Jenkins, you and your squad. I never forgot your face, sir, your courage." He paused, swallowing hard, his gaze returning to the Purple Heart on the cane. "Or the wound you took doing it." He gestured significantly to the medal. "That trinket," he said, his voice hardening instantly as he shot a glacial, contemptuous look directly at the cowering Bradley, "was awarded to this man because he dragged 3 critically wounded Marines, myself included, across open ground under a hail of machine gun fire and mortar rounds to the relative safety of a bomb crater. He did this after taking shrapnel to his leg and chest. He refused evacuation until every one of his wounded men was accounted for. That piece of metal is a symbol of valor that you, young man, clearly cannot even begin to comprehend." The entire area around Gate B-17 had fallen into a stunned, breathless silence. Passengers moments before engrossed in their phones or conversations now stared, transfixed by the unfolding drama. Bradley looked as if he desperately wanted the polished terminal floor to open up and swallow him whole, of disbelief and rapidly dawning horror. Sharon, the gate agent, gasped audibly, her hand flying to her mouth, her eyes wide with shock and shame. Colonel Miller turned fully to face Bradley, his posture radiating cold fury. His voice, when he spoke, was like chips of ice each word, a carefully aimed dart. "You, son, what is your name?" "Bradley, sir," the young clerk stammered, his earlier arrogance completely extinguished, replaced by a pathetic, quavering fear. He looked like a child caught in a terrible transgression. "Bradley," Colonel Miller repeated, drawing out the name, his tone laced with a profound, withering contempt that made several bystanders flinch. "This man, Sergeant Arthur Jenkins, is a decorated combat hero of the United States Marine Corps. The Purple Heart he carries, the one you so callously dismissed as a trinket and a souvenir's, a testament to his bravery. His sacrifice for this country, for your freedom to stand here and behave like an ill-mannered, ignorant, disrespectful child, he bled for that medal. Bradley, he endured pain you cannot imagine for that medal. What have you ever bled for, Bradley? Besides, perhaps, a minor paper cut from mishandling a boarding pass or an official airline directive." Bradley's face was now a painful, mottled beach-tread. He couldn't meet the colonel's piercing eyes, his gaze fixed on his own suddenly. Fascinating shoes. "I didn't know, sir," he mumbled, his voice barely a whisper. I'm so sorry." "You didn't know because you didn't care to know," Colonel Miller retorted, his voice cutting like a whip. "You judged a man by his age, by his quiet demeanor, by the simplicity of his clothes. You dismissed him. You disrespected not just him, Sergeant Arthur Jenkins, but every single man and woman who has ever worn the uniform of this nation, who has ever served and sacrificed often in ways you are too callow to even conceive of." The colonel then turned his stern gaze to Sharon, the gate agent, who visibly shrank under his scrutiny. "And you, madam," he said, his voice losing none of its sharp edge, "you stood by. You heard his disparaging remarks. You witnessed his appalling behavior and you said nothing. You did nothing. Your silence in this instance was complicity. It was an endorsement of his disrespect." Sharon looked down at her console, her face burning with shame. Colonel Miller's gaze swept over the no-substantial crowd of onlookers, his voice ringing with a passionate conviction that commanded absolute attention. "This man," he declared, his hand gently resting on Arthur's shoulder, "and thousands, tens of thousands like him, living quietly in our communities are the bedrock of our nation. They are the reason we can all stand here today, the reason we can board this aircraft, travel freely, live our lives in peace and security. They ask for nothing in return for their service, for their sacrifice except, perhaps, are quiet, understanding, and our respect. And they deserve that respect. Every single one of them, every single day, without question and without reservation. He turned back to Arthur Jenkins, his stern military demeanor softening instantly into one of profound warmth and admiration. "Sergeant Jenkins," he said, his voice now imbued with deep emotion, "it is truly an honor, a profound honor, to see you again, sir, after all these years." He then did something that stunned everyone present into absolute awed silence. Colonel Daniel Miller of Fulbert, colonel in the United States Air Force, a man clearly accustomed to giving orders and receiving salutes, snapped rigidly to attention. His back was ramrod straight, his chin tucked in. He then rendered a perfect, crisp, and deeply respectful salute to Sergeant Arthur Jenkins, former U.S. Marine. A beat of stunned, palpable silence hung in the air, so thick you could almost touch it. Then dash, as if a spell had been broken, something truly incredible, something profoundly moving began to happen. The pilot of the aircraft, Captain Ava Rostova, a woman with a calm, authoritative presence, had emerged from the jet bridge, her attention drawn by the unusual silence and then the colonel's impassioned words. She had heard enough to understand the gravity of the situation. Without a moment's hesitation, Captain Rostovova, expression one of solemn respect also, snapped to attention and rendered a sharp, precise salute to Arthur Jenkins. Then, the co-pilot, standing just behind her, followed suit. He, too, saluted. Then dash, one by one, the flight attendants, emerging from the aircraft to investigate the commotion, saw their captain and co-pilot at attention, heard the murmurs rippling through the crowd, and understood. They formed a small, impromptu line at the entrance to the jet bridge, and they, too, saluted Arthur. The atmosphere in the gate area had transformed. Other passengers, many with tears welling in their eyes, began to applaud. A soft, hesitant sound at first, then growing into a warm, heartfelt ovation. Several older men in the crowd, men who carried themselves with a certain familiar bearing, stood a little straighter, their faces etched with pride and a shared understanding. The young boy, who had initially asked about the shiny purple thing, now looked at Arthur with wide, awestruck eyes, his earlier confusion replaced by a dawning comprehension of heroism. His mother, her face softened by emotion, whispered something into his ear, and the boy tentatively, shyly, raised his small hand in a clumsy, endearing imitation of a salute. Bradley, early humiliated and visibly shaken, looked as if he were about to cry. He stumbled forward, approaching Arthur with his head bowed low, his entire posture one of abject shame. "Mr. Jenkins, Sergeant Jenkins, sir," he choked out, his voice thick with emotion, "I am so terribly sorry. I was an idiot, a complete and utter fool. There's no excuse for my behavior, none at all. Please, sir, please, can you ever forgive me?" Arthur looked at the young man, his expression unreadable for a long moment. He saw not a malicious bully, but a profoundly ignorant and misguided youth, someone who had perhaps never been taught the true meaning of respect or sacrifice. Hint of a sad, knowing smile touched Arthur's lips. "Son," he said, his voice quiet but firm, carrying clearly in the now hushed area, "everybody makes mistakes. The important thing is to learn from them. Respect isn't about the uniform someone wears today, or the job title they hold, or how much money they have. It's about the content of their character, son. It's about the sacrifices they've made, whether those sacrifices are visible to the world or hidden deep inside. Remember that." Colonel Miller placed a supportive hand on Arthur's shoulder. "Sergeant Jenkins," he said warmly, "allow me to personally escort you onto the aircraft. You will be my guest of honor for this flight." He then turned his commanding gaze back to the gate agent Sharon, who was now wringing her hands. "Madame Agent," he stated, his tone brooking no argument, "please ensure that Sergeant Jenkins is immediately upgraded to a first-class seat. No arguments, no excuses. And I will be lodging a formal complaint with your station manager, indeed, with airline headquarters regarding this entire disgraceful incident. This airline and its staff clearly require a serious top-down lesson in how to treat our nation's veterans with the dignity and honor they have earned." Sharon nodded quickly, her face pale. "Yes, Colonel, absolutely, sir. Right away, Colonel, it will be done." she began typing furiously into her computer, her fingers flying across the keyboard with a newfound urgency. A panicked message from Sharon was already hurrying towards the gate, his face a mask of concern and apprehension. Arthur Jenkins, no longer just an anonymous old man with a cane, but a recognized hero. A man whose quiet valor had been unexpectedly thrust into the spotlight, was gently escorted onto the aircraft by Colonel Daniel Miller as they stepped into the first-class cabin. They were met by a spontaneous standing ovation from the other passengers, who had been quickly and emotionally informed of the situation at the gate by an awed flight attendant. The warmth and respect in their eyes was a balm to Arthur's soul. Bradley, left behind at the gate, was visibly shaken, trembling, facing not only an official airline complaint and disciplinary action, but more importantly, a profound and deeply uncomfortable personal reckoning with his own ignorance and cruelty. The airline station manager, who had arrived breathless and aghast, profusely apologized to Colonel Millerand through him, to Arthur promising a full and immediate review of staff training protocols, particularly concerning the respectful treatment of military personnel, veterans, and elderly passengers. This day, which had begun with such casual indignities, as a stark, unforgettable reminder to everyone at Gate B-17 that true heroes often walk among us unseen. Unheard, their extraordinary sacrifices hidden beneath the quiet dignity of age or the unassuming cloak of humble circumstance. It taught a powerful lesson that true worth isn't measured by outward appearances, by youthful arrogance, or by loud, self-important pronouncements, but by courage, by service, and by the quiet, enduring resilience of the human spirit. Respect the incident underscored is earned through selfless actions and profound sacrifice, not demanded by a fleeting position of minor authority, and it should be given freely, generously, and unequivocally to those who have given so much of themselves for the common good. As Arthur settled into his spacious, comfortable first-class seat, a flight attendant approached him, her demeanor a perfect blend of professionalism and genuine warmth. "Sergeant Jenkins," she said softly, "is there anything at all I can get for you? Anything to make your flight more comfortable?" Arthur simply smiled, the first genuine, untroubled smile he had allowed himself all day. It was a smile that reached his eyes, crinkling their corners. "No, thank you, dear," he said. "Everything is just fine." He looked out the small aircraft window at the bustling tarmac, below the Purple Heart on his cane handle resting on his lap, catching the light, a silent, gleaming testament. Later, during the flight after the seatbelt sign was switched off, Colonel Miller came to sit with him. They spoke for hours, not as a colonel and a sergeant, but as to servicemen, to comrades, bridging the vast gulf of decades with shared memories, common experiences, and an unbreakable bond forged in the crucible of conflict. The young boy? From the gate, his earlier curiosity, now transformed into pure admiration, was brought by his mother to Arthur's seat. He shyly, reverently, shook Arthur's hand, his eyes full of a new understanding of heroism. For the rest of that journey to Denverand, perhaps for a long time to come, in the memories of those who witnessed it, every airline staff member, Arthur encountered treated him with a deference, a kindness, and a warmth that spoke volumes about the impact of that dramatic moment at Gate B-17. Bradley, it was learned some weeks later, through a follow-up letter from the airline to Colonel Miller, had requested and been granted a transfer to a non-customer-facing role within the company. More significantly, he had begun volunteering 3 evenings a week at a local VA hospital, a tentative, humble first step on what he described as a long road to understanding and atonement, the courage of one. The respect of many. Stories like Arthur's remind us all to look deeper beyond the surface to honor the unseen sacrifices and the hidden valor that so often reside in the quiet corners of our world. If this story touched your heart and reaffirmed your faith in the good that can emerge even from moments of disrespect, subscribe to Hidden Sparks for more inspirational moments and true stories of human dignity. Like and share this story if it moved you, and remember, always show respect. Type honor in the comments below if you stand with our veterans. Subscribe to Hidden Sparks for more powerful reminders of the heroes among us. Let's spread this message of respect. Like, share, and subscribe to Hidden Sparks today.